they went back to the sea here, and another time in evolution, other types of ancestors rediscovered the marine life and adapted to it. So we can actually better understand the way as to which species and orders came to be in the past. Another thing that we could learn is, for example, those animals which eat on ants, you know, the insects. We also know that two different ancestors adapted to eating ants. They are not, this is not something that happened only once in the mammalian evolutionary tree, because these type of animals and these type of animals are not related in the tree. Another example, and that would be the last for the mammals, is that we learned that those animals that look to me very much the same are actually very independent evolutionary. They developed and formed independently twice, because one is Afrotherian, the other one is Ulipotifla here, and this one, you know the English name of that one, that's the hedgehog. So we see that animals that will look very much the same to me, in fact, reflects two very different histories of evolution. This is the kind of things that you understand if you have the tree. And if you didn't have the tree, I would have made them just visually close relatives, where they are not, in fact. Another thing that you can learn about the tree is, for example, how come some species have developed a lot of parasites. For example, if you think about those types of insects, we call them wasps, they have developed some parasites that they actually develop in their bodies, right? And other parasites are those ones which call them lice that would actually bite on your body and stay in your hair with a number of different mammals. We can ask the question, if we have the evolutionary tree of the host and the parasite, how this association came to be in evolution. Another case that you could try to learn is whether those ants that are cultivating mushrooms or fungi, in fact, we call them farming ants, whether they develop the farming once or many times. And likewise, we could ask the question whether when bovids differentiated into different species, whether their microbiomes, those living in their guts, actually co-speciated with them. And so how do you tackle those questions? Imagine that you had a phylogeny, a tree of the hosts, for example, a tree of the mammals, and on the other side, a tree of the parasites, for example, of the lice. If those trees are parallel, it means that any time one host speciated, differentiated into different species, they co-diverge with their parasites. It means that their ancestors had a parasite, and by simply splitting, they splitted the populations of parasites, which became naturally different species. But you could, if you have phylogeny, find different situations where the two phylogenies are not mirroring each other out, in which case you will interpret that as not at all the same. It will mean that these hosts actually could have parasites coming from one species or another species getting into this same host, or another species getting into the same host, meaning that evolutionarily what happened is that hosts, the parasites switched hosts. They invaded different types of species in the past, all found today in the same species. And actually, if you have on trees, you can't decide which model is correct. And in fact, this work has been done to estimate whether parasites and their host co-speciated had similar trees, and whether it was the same from symbionts, the farming ants and their fungi, for example. And what people have discovered is that more so this is a mirror phylogeny, because if it goes above 0 in this particular plot, it means that the phylogenies are correlated. But you see that there is a number of instances where it is 0 or even negatively correlated, meaning that sometimes it's a switch of host that has happened, right? So you see how evolution can have been complexed in the past by simply looking at trees. So indeed, it's very important to think in terms of trees. A last example that I have to you is what you can learn about past population histories if you have trees. Imagine that you're interested in this orb weaver spider that you see here of this genus, and this genus is specific to the Antilles, which is the Cuba Islands, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and the French Antilles, like Guadeloupe, Martinique, and these kind of places. Well, this is a tree that has been built on, I think, the cytochrome oxidase 1 gene, basically a mitochondrial gene, and the colors will reflect the island where those animals have been captured. You can see that the tree is very well sorted by colors, isn't it? In which the first divergence is in Hispaniola, then the second one in Puerto Rico, then in Cuba, and then in the different islands. So if you have such a history, you're tempted to reconstruct a history where the ancestor was living in Hispaniola, and from that island, at some point, migrated successfully into Puerto Rico, developing into a new group of populations here, and then from Puerto Rico, probably rediscovered Cuba because it created a different population in Cuba, and then discovered that island and Jamaica from there. So you see that even for animals like that small and where you don't have much data, if you have the genes and the population tree, probably you can reconstruct the complex migration history in a given situation. So indeed, thinking about trees can be important for reconstructing evolutionary histories. But I want you to know that it's also important sometimes in humans as well, because trees have been used to test whether people were guilty of some crimes. For example, this is a case that has been published 20 years ago in PNAS, but that is a real case that has been used in the court in the US to actually find guilty one person. And what that person has been doing is that there was a doctor who was suspected to have tried to kill his former girlfriend by injecting her with blood that was infected by HIV, you know, the virus, HIV. And this doctor had access to HIV, to blood that was infected by HIV because some of his patients had HIV. So he kept the blood and he infected his girlfriend to retaliate because the guy was probably sick, I guess. And so what people have used to demonstrate that he was indeed the one doing that is that they built trees. So they sequenced the genome of the HIV in the girlfriend blood, they sequenced the HIV in the blood of his patients, and they could demonstrate that they were the same sequence. So simply building trees sometimes can convict people in trials in case of deciding whether it was guilty or not. Okay? So trees can be important to reconstruct the past, but they can be sometimes very informative to convict criminals as well. So in terms of the terminology, you have to know a number of things when it comes to trees. So trees, we call the external part of the trees, we call them leaves. Like in the tree, you have leaves at the end. So often leaves are species or individuals or populations, right? We call that leaf. We call the branch leading to external leaves, we call that internal branch.